This is an interview on the 9th of June 2009 with John Hanna, VX127780, V66076, Private, 39th Battalion, A Company, 7th Platoon. Can I call you Pat?
You certainly can.
How did you come to be called Pat?
Well, I understand that there was a First World War digger who was a comedian, and his name was Pat Hanna. So when I joined up with the services in the Scottish Battalion, I was called Pat, and that's been a nickname with me ever since.
And prior to joining up with the Army, what was your job, just briefly?
I was employed as a clerk at Hullproof in Brunswick, and then I went to James Miller and Company, also in Brunswick, and was a clerk there for 40 years.
And you didn't join up, you actually volunteered for the Army of your own?
Yes, my mate and I decided that we were going to go and win the war, and we decided we wanted to join the Navy. But unfortunately, his mother wouldn't let him join, so we decided, well, okay, we'll go to the next best place, which was the Victorian Scottish Battalion down in Hawthorn, and we joined then in, I think, around about April, May 1941.
Was there any reason why you chose the 5th Battalion?
No, just probably that was the nearest place we could go.
And with the 5th Battalion, you used to obviously go on camps?
Yes, we did a camp there. I believe it would be from sometime around the June period, June to August 1941, and I was in C Company of the 5th Battalion. My mate didn't go with me, he was in D Company, but as time progressed from there, there was a call for volunteers to go to the 39th Battalion, and I sought to go to them and went in October 1941 up to Darley and did the base course at Darley until we sailed away on Boxing Day 1941 on the Aquitania.
When they called for volunteers when you're in the 5th Battalion, was it quite clear that the 39th would be going to New Guinea? Was that
No, it was not clear that at all, but we just knew we were going to go away and serve with the Army, that was all. And it came out later on that we were militia, of course, and we could not be sent outside Australian waters, and therefore it eventually got through to us that we would be going to New Guinea or Papua New Guinea.
And quite a few 5th Battalion members went on to the 39th.
Yes, I don't know exactly how many there were, but I do know that the 7th Platoon, A Company, 39th Battalion were all members or ex-members of the 5th Battalion.
And what was it like being in a new battalion, being at Darley? Was it exciting?
Well, it was very exciting. It was something completely new, and we thought we were getting really well trained. We were told later on we were chocos and didn't get good training. But anyway, we did have some fun while we were there. We were, instead of tents, I think we were in barracks there. We had tin sheds as barracks, and palliasses, of course, straw palliasses. That was a lot of fun. And we did the Battle of Cressy prior to being embarked on the Aquitania. It was real good.
And what was the Battle of Cressy like?
In Battle of Cressy, I was a driver of a truck, and I learned a lot of things. But the most important one was that when you're a driver of a truck, you always get a hot meal, and the way to get it is that you tie your tin of bully beef on top of the cylinder block and it gets heated for you. And that was a very wonderful experience as far as I was concerned.
With the truck driving, did you drive trucks prior to going in the Army, or was that something you learnt in the Army?
No, I didn't drive trucks. I had a licence to drive a car, but I'd never driven a truck before. And of course I learnt my experience on a 3-tonner, learned how to change gears without using the clutch, etc., as all good drivers do. And it was an experience to learn those sort of things.
And how was the feeling amongst the members of the 39th, the morale at Darley? Pretty good?
Well, I would have thought that the morale at Darley was very good as far as I was concerned. It was. We kept to ourselves, we fraternised together, and we get into Darley there and get to the pub on leave on a Friday or whatever it was for 2 hours, come back and back up again. But that was a very enjoyable experience as far as that was concerned. I don't think that I don't really remember doing the bullring training at Darley like I did down at Mount Martha with the Scottish Battalion, but it was a very interesting setup that they had up there at Darley.
Were there other AIF units at Darley at the same time?
We towards the end of, apparently, the AIF came back to Darley from the Middle East, and they were there at Darley when we left and gave us a send-off. It wasn't very nice, but it was a good time, I said by all.
And in the early days there at Darley, you would have been training with the 303, the First World War.
Yes, it was all 303 stuff as far as I was concerned. And probably the interesting part about that type of thing is to advance a little bit and say that when we arrived up at Moresby on the 3rd of January, I was very fortunate, actually. I was a baggage boy and I got a ride out to the 7 Mile Strip where the other poor devils had to march out there. But the job that we had at the 7 Mile Strip was we had a weapon pit that must have been fully 20 feet in diameter, 3 to 4 feet deep, and on the inside perimeter were 44-gallon drums stacked with dirt. And right in the very middle of that was the Lewis gun, with which you expected to hit bombers and fighters that flew at 15 to 20,000 feet. It was a wonderful experience. And one very interesting and humorous experience I had while we were on duty in the weapon pit. Private Alan Smith, I'm not sure whether it was Alan or Jack, they were twins. And whichever one it was, he and I were on duty, and there was an air raid. And the bombs dropped around us, and we got spattered with dirt. At the particular time, I was behind Alan and had my head buried in his back. Now, keep in mind that we're at Moresby, it's very hot. We're in shorts, boots, socks, nothing else but a tin hat. And all of a sudden, when we got spattered with dirt, Alan says, I've been hit. And bombers had long gone, and I brushed the dust and dirt off his back. I said, no, it's only dirt. So I accidentally tilted my tin hat back, and it was red hot, and that's what was burning in his back. And I thought that was humorous. He didn't see the funny side, but I did.
So after Darley, you were trained and clothed. What was your uniform like at Darley? Just the standard
uniform at Darley, and we went away, I think, with those standard equipment, which was khakis, but eventually we got shorts and shirts. Oh, the other interesting incident was when we got up to Moresby, and was on the baggage thing. When we went out to 7 Mile, there was nobody to meet us, and we were just dumped where we were supposed to be, and no tents, no mosquito nets or anything like that. But there must have been other troops there. I don't know who they were, but they gave us a cup of tea, and the rest of the troops arrived round about so-called 10 in the evening, might have even been 12, who knows. And they got a cup of tea, and that was it. But we didn't have any equipment really at all. They had to find their own bags in the dark, and we had a wonderful night that night.
So at the finish of your training, just sort of regress to Darley a bit, at the finish of training, prior to going up to Sydney to catch Aquitania, there was a battalion march through the streets of Melbourne.
There was,
Were you involved in that?
I was involved in that.
What can you remember about that?
Not a great deal. I can remember marching, and that's about all. I think they came into Melbourne by rail, and we marched, and we went back out to Darley. And I think it was probably the next morning we were entrained, and the way we went on the train through to Albury and changed at Albury into the train to Sydney, Woolloomooloo, took us through there, disembarked at Woolloomooloo onto the Aquitania, and that was it, away we went.
And that was a big ship?
That was a big ship. That was a real big ship.
And Pat, you probably hadn't been out of Victoria at that age, would you?
Oh, no, I don't think I'd gone very far. I might have gone up to Sydney or Brisbane, but with my mother when I was a child. But other than that, no, I'd never been away on my own, put it that way.
But the Aquitania was one of the really big ships.
We'd never seen anything like that. It was probably, 50,000-60,000 tonnes. Again, the story that I can't authenticate, of course, was that that was one of the most heavily armed escorts for a troop carrier that, well, I think that they'd seen probably here in Australia. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But I understand that there were a couple of battleships and a couple of cruisers and 2 sloops involved, and away beyond that a couple of Yankee vessels of some description. One experience we had, the 7th Platoon, was we were on lookout duty, and by virtue of that we were very, very fortunate because we could have the run of the galley. When we'd come off duty, we could always go down to the galley and get a lovely hot cup of coffee and some nice fresh bread. It was very good. We only had one scare, to my knowledge, that they thought there was a submarine in the area, and all of a sudden we noticed a change in the engine of the Aquitania. We were probably doing about 10 knots because of the convoy, maximum convoy speed with the other ships. But all of a sudden the Aquitania started to speed up and we cleared out from these other ships, and she really chugged away, the old Aquitania. But eventually they caught up with us again. It was only a scare.
And as you got further north, it would have got warmer and warmer?
It certainly did. We got hotter and hotter. The weather was beautiful in those days. That was good part of it. Even when we got right through up into Moresby and landed there, well, that was very hot and muggy, and you had to get acclimatised. We could put up with the heat, particularly after being, well, earlier on in the time when we'd camped in June down in Victoria. This was good.
And what did you think when the Aquitania steamed into Port Moresby Harbour?
Well, again, the recollections are a bit vague, but as I say, I was on a baggage situation, a baggage group, and the Aqu had to anchor out in the bay itself, and we had to come in with the little Corvettes or whatever they were, the sloops, the Yarra and the Swan, and they took us into the wharf. So, you know, you were transferring one vessel to another. I don't know whether we climbed down ropes or what we did. I really don't recall. But it was interesting exercises to get in there, and whoever met us with the trucks, and we had to load the trucks, and then I got a ride out, I was happy.
You must have been one of the very few to get a ride out, because most of the guys had to walk out to the 7 Mile. Of course, hence the name, it was 7 miles.
That's right.
And they had to march at night, I think. And
yes, well, they did. I couldn't tell you whether we arrived early in the morning or not, but I was actually on the baggage duty there, and we went out in the daylight, but the other troops that had to march out, they didn't get there until very late in the evening, there, 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock at night. And there was nothing there for us. We just dumped there. That's basically all there was. We didn't go into a camp, we just flopped where we were, and it was rocky. It was really rocky. There was very little sleep that night.
Before you left Australia, the Japanese had only been in the war only a few weeks.
That's right.
So was there any news coming through when you're up in New Guinea, what was happening up in Singapore, or what was happening?
No, not really. At that time we had no idea what was going on. We knew, of course, the war was on, that December the 7th had happened, because we knew that before we went away. But we didn't know really one way or the other what the score was, who was winning, what had happened overseas beyond where we were. And to all intents and purposes, while we were there, when we arrived, there was no action as such at all. That didn't occur until later on.
So part of your job was really to guard the 7 Mile drome, and the 39th basically settled into a life at the 39th.
Well, that's about it.
At the 7 Mile drome.
That's yes. That's it exactly. We eventually got tents and put the tents up, and that was our camp. And the duties that we had was guarding the 7 Mile strip. Hence that message that I gave before about the weapon pit that we were in with using a Lewis gun. But fancy using the Lewis gun to shoot bombers. There was an ACAC outfitter somewhere in the Moresby hill somewhere there. But we had no hope of doing anything. We just had to sit there and wait.
So what was your daily routine
Oh,
at the 7 Mile?
look, daily routine, it's so vague. Time was, I don't know how we filled our time in. You'd obviously had to do your duty in the weapon pit and then you'd be there for 2 hours or whatever it might be, and you'd be relieved and you'd go back up to the camp, was 100 yards away or 200 yards, and you'd have some meals or whatever it was, you'd sleep, you'd play cards or whatever, but there was nothing there to do. You couldn't go anywhere. They wouldn't let you meander off to see what's going on around the place. You just had to be there.
Did you get into Port Moresby much? Driving trucks or getting down there to do
No, I didn't at all. There was the only thing that happened with Port Moresby that I can recall was we must have had leave to go in there on some occasions. Now, we probably were taken in there and picked up by a truck. Although why we would go in there, I don't know. There's nothing that we could think of. There was no pictures or anything like that to go to. But I do recall that there was a lot of stores that were in there, and certain things got taken from those stores and eventually found their way back into Australia. I do recall that, but I can't recall how or why. I know that I had some knives, forks that were meant for the Imperial Hotel, and my name, not as I was known in the army, but my name, I'd been called Ian all my life until I was christened when I was 12, John. And the Imperial Hotel were my initials, and I had some of those knives, forks and spoons.
Some of the very first casualties suffered by the 39th was on the MacDouey, unloading the MacDouey down at the wharf when it was bombed. Do you remember anything about that?
No, I don't. I have no idea of that at all. What
was your feeling when the first air raid started?
Well, I suppose we were all scared. We didn't know what was going to happen, and we'd never been under that type of action before. People fly. And really speaking, the first thing that occurred up there that I can record, even before the bombing raids came over, they had, I think there was a Lockheed and a TriStar and another sort of plane was there. That was the only aircraft that we had, supposedly, to be looking after.
A tri-motor.
A tri-motor, yeah. It wasn't a TriStar. You've got Anson tri-motor, yeah. Anson tri-motor.
Or a Ford tri-motor.
Well, whatever. Anyway, the first instance as far as the war itself was concerned, was there was some Japanese recce plane come over, and they were up, and who knows how many feet high they were, but they were way up, and you couldn't hit them with the Lewis gun. And that was that happened a couple of times, perhaps over a period of a week, and then the bombing started. But that was, I would suggest that probably could have been January, sometime in the latter part of January 41. 42, sorry, January 42. But that was our experience. But we had no idea what bombing was like or anything like that. I'd never seen it, never heard of bombs coming down, really. I've been to, no doubt other personnel had, but as far as we were concerned, this was our first operational situation. That was it.
Did you see much strafing by Japanese Zeros?
Not a great deal. I didn't see a great deal there because I then moved on.
So talking about moving on, they were asking for volunteers for the spotters.
That's right. Well,
round about April 1942. So you'd probably been there nearly 4 months now.
Yes, it was during that first 3 months, I guess, that they called for volunteers to go into the Papuan Administrative Unit. That's what it was originally, and these were called. They were calling for volunteers to be sent to outstations to form a ring around Moresby, and there was a 30-mile ring, I believe, and a 60-mile ring, and a 90-mile ring. And when I volunteered to go and join this particular unit, along with no doubt others. But I think that I was really in the second call up as far as volunteers were concerned. I think some of the volunteers went into the Papua Administrative Unit maybe even as early as February 1940 or late January 1942, because there were what was eventually known as spotters already either out or going out when I went in. And I went in and I was doing a cipher course, or coding, learning how to code messages to send back by either voice and or Morse key. Not being a trained Morse operator, it would all be voice. And that was, I was only really involved with sending voice messages back, which had to be sort of instant messages. The bombers would be going over above us, and we'd get onto the wireless and voice through to Moresby. There were so many bombers flying in such and such a direction at an estimated height of whatever, and that would be the end of the message. But we'd learned the code because if some of the stations would have been involved with not actually being in physical contact with the Japanese, but being close enough to be able to report on their movements and all their numbers and types of troops that they were, and that had to be encoded in a long message and sent through by Morse.
And this training was undertaken at this 9-mile drive?
9 mile, and eventually out of I think it was 18 mile that eventually I did the course at, but somewhere near, I think it was Brigadier Strong, somebody by the name of Strong. He was initially a resident of Papua New Guinea. It was in that particular area.
And you were only 20 years old at this stage?
Well, in 1942, I was just turned 20 years.
When you turned 20, you were still with the 39th. Can you remember anything about your birthday? Did you just celebrate it? Or?
Well, no. I don't really remember a great deal about it, but no doubt it would have been celebrated because I believe we did have an issue of beer of 1 bottle or 2 bottles per person per week or whatever. The other instance I can recall was when I was doing this course, and the initial course, the cipher course, as I call it, that we got involved in relieving an officer's mess of a keg of rum. And it was put to a very good use by quite a number of personnel until they found out that the officers found out where it was. But that must have been around about the time I had a birthday too, so I had a good time then, but a hangover afterwards.
Was it a little bit sad leaving the 39th, or...?
Yes, it was, but it was an adventure. The same, I guess, when I was with the 5th Battalion and the opportunity came to go to another unit. It was a change. It was something different. And I think the same thing applied with going into the administrative unit for the spotters. It eventually became spotters. It was something different. And it was, in fact, different, quite different to army life as I knew it, or had known it beforehand.
Because, a couple of months after you left the 39th, they then went on to the Kokoda Track, and the rest is history now. That's
right. Well, the only thing, I had nothing whatsoever to do, of course, with the Kokoda Track, but we would be, by virtue of being with the spotting outfit, no doubt a lot of information would have been sent through by the various spotters to headquarters to say that the Japanese were in this vicinity or that vicinity and whatever. So we would have been of some assistance there as far as the ground movements are concerned.
So the main role of the spotters was to go out to very isolated areas and spot for aircraft movements, troop movements, ship movements even?
All those sort of things, that was the aim of it, and that's why they had the 30-mile circle, the 60-mile circle, and whatever they are, the 100-mile. And by virtue of, particularly with the aircraft movements, as each report went in from each outlying station getting closer to Moresby, which was information which was relayed to the Air Force. They knew exactly how long they had before they had to get their own aircraft airborne to intercept the bombers or fighters, whatever it may have been. And it was of great value under those circumstances.
And you were your rank was a signaller
Yes.
in the air wireless?
Yes.
And what were the blokes like? Were they good blokes?
Oh, yes, we were all of an age, and it's like anything when you're getting 3, 4, 5, 6 people together, like has happened right throughout the army camp. You get friendly with your 6, that sort of business, and they're your mates for life. And that's the way it's been as far as I've been concerned, and I'm sure it happens with everybody else that's put in that same situation. That you're relying on them and what they do, and they're relying on you and what you do and what happens, so that you really everything's done to assist each other. And you can, that's the meaning of the mateship, really, of the whole situation. It's good. And the discipline you get there, and the learning you get there, each would bring his own little incidents and come along. And they'd teach you different things that you knew nothing about. I mean, the city boys and the country boys are completely two different things. How they would trap rabbits, we never knew how to trap a rabbit in our life, how to skin a rabbit, but we learned. And we learned how to live off the land, particularly when we were out in the scrub with 2 or 3 of us.
So during the month that you did the cipher course, was it very difficult to learn something like ciphers?
No, not really, because it was a very easy code that they learned there, and it was something that had to be taught very quickly because and had to be very, very easy code. So really speaking, it was a learning course, but you could learn it in a matter of a week or 10 days, and away you would go. You could survive on it. There's no worries about that part of it at all. So
there was a whole bunch of troops that went through the same course?
Yes, there was a number of troops that do it, but it was only 10 or 20 troops. There wasn't a lot of troops doing this particular course that I did, but they went to various parts, and that would be an ongoing situation too. The others would follow up.
So after your 4-week cipher course, you got sent on your first deployment. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I can. They after completing the course, they were setting up these stations, and they organised it in such a manner that they would use, say, 4 or 5 people were going out to an outstation, or 6 people, whatever. They'd go to an outstation and would be taken out by a competent signaller who would install us in the area where we were, whether it's 30 mile, 60 mile, whatever, and we would set up our own generator, our batteries and our wireless and receiver, and they would set us up there, and away they'd go, put down the next fellow 100 yards or 100 miles away or 60 miles away, and that was it. We just went straight into operation and reported straight back to Moresby. And keep in mind that the circles that they had were to points, we'll say, north, east and west. Nothing to the south, of course, because you're out to the ocean, and varying points on the compass, and that's what happened. And they gradually sent them further and further out, and they were getting more and more coverage with these areas that they were putting them into. And I suppose, I don't know actually how many stations we had, but I guess that eventually, when we were finally, or before we were broken up as a unit, we probably had the best part of 150 to 200 outstations over the whole of New Guinea, Papua and New Guinea, right up through to Humboldt Bay, which is on the border of Indonesia, West New Guinea as it was then.
So in April and May in 1942, you were sent to the Robinson River.
That's right. Robinson River was a plantation, a coconut plantation pre-war, and that's where we set our station up because it was of an elevated position, and we could see the coastline and we could see the manoeuvring in the air with the aircraft, and there was no Japanese troops, of course, at that particular time anywhere near us. So we set our own station up, and we operated from there for probably about 6 months, when I then moved down into our bow, as we could do just the same from down at our bow. Our bow was a different situation in as much as it was a resident magistrates area, and there were it was only a very tiny island, probably about 300 or 400 yards long and maybe 200 yards wide, but it was the local resident magistrate, and they had a jail there for any of the natives that played up. And they had court there and ran the courts, and we had our own set up there, a station. We set our own station up down there and operated from there. And while we were there, we built a small airfield about 200 yards long, and we could get a tiger moth to come in and land, which was very fortunate we could do so, as can be explained later on.
So that's not a very big island to live on. What did you do during the day? Because you wouldn't have been kept busy all day, because there wouldn't have been any movements.
No, we weren't. We worked in shifts. There was two, actually where I was, there was 3 operators, and we worked in the shift. We'd probably have 4 hours on, 8 hours off, and vary it, then swap round. And while you were on duty, well, of course, you were at the station. The other time, well, you were, the island was only that small, you couldn't go anywhere. But you filled your time. We played cards and we did all sorts of things. I'd start to learn a smattering of the languages up there, that I could talk to the natives in their language. But it's only just to be able to talk to them more than anything else. I couldn't have a conversation with them in their language or anything like that. But we seemed to do all right. You learn to live that way. You're isolated. And you've got the company of the other fellas, and you've got to get on, or it's hell to pay, but you make things work, and that's the way it goes.
Was the island very far from the mainland? Could you get to the mainland by boat?
We could go to the mainland. We could use the natives and use a lugger, a sailboat sort of thing, and go to the islands. You could get time off to do that, but you could only be away for hours. Couldn't be away overnight or anything like that. We could go. We lived off the land, more or less. There was native gardens there. We actually had a cook boy, and there were police boys on the island, and they controlled everything that we needed to know. We never got into any bother there, and any bother that was likely to happen, we could always get the police boys to handle that for us.
It was very important that you had trust in the natives.
It was, yes, and then you knew who you could trust and who you couldn't trust. But I was in a slightly different situation to a lot of the others who were really on their own. As I said, I was on a resident magistrate station, and there was other white personnel there as well, but and local white personnel were there. But some of the others, they had to learn who they could trust and who they couldn't trust, but they managed to do that by the use of the police boys that they'd have with them themselves. They were the ones that would find out all the information and do whatever was necessary to get the right information to pass on to us.
And what were your meals like? What was the cook like?
Well, the cook boy we had there, he was very good. He could make cakes, but they lived off the land. We ate the native food as far as that was concerned, but he could turn out a batch of scones. In fact, he could make a sponge better than or as good as my mother could make, and they made it from Soputa, where Mum never even knew what a Soputa was.
So you were there from about April, May 1942 through to September 1943, which is a fair time.
Yes.
But you had a hand in rescuing a war correspondent,
yes.
a US war correspondent. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I can. as I said before, we made an airstrip, a small airstrip on the island of Abau. It was about 200 yards, I suppose, in length. We could land a tiger moth on or take a tiger moth off. And during the course of our sojourn down at Abau, the word came to us that there was an aircraft, a Marauder, American Marauder aircraft had been shot down over on the Buna side of the island, and we sent a patrol across, and we managed to find a war correspondent whose name was Vern Hogland, and we rescued him and brought him back to Abau, and he was without food, eating food, for 32 days from the time that he was shot down in the plane until we got him back to Abau. He was frightened to eat. The natives wanted to feed him, but he wouldn't eat. He would only drink water. And he was a man that, when we got him back to Abau, we thought that he was in the vicinity of 6'3", 6'4" initially, in good health, and he probably gained the best part of 14, 15 stone. And when we got him back at Abau, he was skin and bone. After 32 days, he was out of his mind, and eventually when we radioed through to Moresby and explained the situation, they sent down a First World War pilot in a Tiger Moth who took him back into Moresby, brought with him a straitjacket, and we tied him up with the straitjacket and we tied him into the front cockpit, and they got him back to Moresby. And the information that we received in later life was that he had gone to Moresby, transferred from Moresby to Townsville, from Townsville back to the States, all in a matter of probably 2 months' time, and to all intents and purposes was fully recovered. But that was just one experience that we had and the types of operations we had to do.
So in September 1943, you flew back to Port Moresby, so you'd finish your stint out there. Did all of you go back, or just yourself?
No, I was the only one that went back then. Actually, I'd gone out and to the Robinson River plantation, and it was local Papuan local white personnel who were the owners of the plantation, or the managers of the plantation who ran it, and they were running the receivers and wireless at the time, that they didn't have the coding to do. And I went out on my own, and I was, as they replaced the local Papuan, white Papuan people, they'd send in other personnel. So, in other words, I was the first soldier to go back from Abau, and I was flown back again by this tiger moth that landed down at Abau and took me back there. Interesting conversation I had with him was, well, what happens when a Zero comes down to shoot us down? He said, don't worry about the Zeros. He said, by the time I've done a turn, they'll be 10 miles past us, and I'll be flying so low they won't be able to get down and get us. And I arrived safely back at Moresby.
Was it a bit sad to leave the guys?
It was sad to leave.
Because you would have got to know them very, very well.
I did, and keep in mind that I didn't know any of the personnel really in Moresby, because I'd been in there and I'd gone to a unit that I didn't know anything about. I didn't know any of the personnel. I'd only done one course, and away we went. And when I got back into Moresby and was taken out to the camp out there, I just didn't know anybody. I knew by names only, and from voice only. When I could hear the voices going over the radio, I could pick where they were and learn where they were. And from there, it was amazing that you could go back there and go into a camp and not know a soul. But you made very welcome, of course, when you got back. And I was going on leave, so that was good.
So that was on leave back to Australia?
Yes, back to Melbourne. I came down to Melbourne. And
that'd be about October 1943.
Yes, I came in October 1940. Well, it's late September, October 1943, and I think I was on a 3-week leave. leave past down here to Melbourne, at which time I became